Okay, it's recording. And some more people are arriving now. Okay, so just everyone knows we're going to start in about a minute. Go. Okay, so it's now 6 p.m. Central European time, so we'll kick this off. So for everyone who has already joined, welcome, thank you for being here. Please keep your microphones off during the presentation. For questions, you can either write them on the chat, or if you're on our WhatsApp group, you can also send the questions there. We'll keep an eye out on all these questions. Please make sure you're sending these questions to everyone so that we can see what you're saying. And I'm Marta, so you know me from the SSI Club, and here today with us we have Mohammad Asfour. He is the regional head of MENA and the Africa Networks at the World Green Building Council. And today we're going to have a presentation about how we can green the world one building at a time. Okay, several more people arriving now. I'm just making sure I accept everyone so everyone can access the room. This webinar is part of the activities of the IE Alumni Sustainability and Social Innovation Club. If you're already part of the club, then great. If you're not and you're joining from somewhere else, please consider joining our club. We're basically focused on bringing together people who care about sustainability and social innovation. We provide opportunities for networking and getting to know people who have similar interests, potentially, finding ways to collaborate with each other, catalyzing some action on the ground for the SDGs. And this is something that Mohammad is also going to talk to us about today, how his work is contributing to making our world a more sustainable place, especially when it comes to buildings. Okay. I think that's it for an introduction, Mohammad. So I think I'm going to hand over to you and we'll get started with the presentation.
Thank you, Marta, and thank you for the opportunity. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I'm very pleased you were all able to join us in this webinar organized by the IE Alumni Sustainability and Social Innovation Club. When Marta suggested a time for this webinar, the world was very different. But the fact that climate change is and will continue to affect our life hasn't changed since. We are in a global crisis and we need global systematic solutions to reverse the damage being caused by climate change. The IPCC tells us that we have until 2050 to decarbonize our way of life to limit global warming to less than 1.5 degrees, beyond which the repercussions on our planet and everything that we do will be disastrous. By 2050, the world's building stock will double, increasing the impact of our sector significantly. Its demand on natural resources is a major contributing factor to global warming, and inefficient, unhealthy buildings are affecting our livelihoods. This global growth places increasing demand on our energy grid, our infrastructure, and resources, including water. As you can see in the slide in front of you, buildings are responsible for 39% of global carbon emissions, yet energy demand will increase by 50% by 2050. Buildings are responsible for 50% of global material use and 42.4 billion tons of materials consumed annually. By 2050, global population will increase by 27% to 9.8 billion, and global floor area will increase by 100%. 104 of the 194 countries that signed the Paris Agreement have committed to improve building energy efficiency to meet mitigation targets, but only 68 or 62 countries currently have building energy codes. Green Building Councils, or GBCs as we like to call them, are independent non-profit organizations made up of businesses and organizations in the building and construction industry. As you can see in the map in front of you, we are the world's largest and most diverse network for green buildings, with over 37,000 members across 70 national green building councils. Our mission is to help create green buildings for everyone, everywhere, enabling people to thrive both today and tomorrow. As you could see from the breakdown of membership within our network, 27% come from the professional services sector, 21% from the building product manufacturers and distributors, 22% are individuals, and 12% are developers, construction companies, and contractors. So what is it that our GBCs do? Our GBCs are working with their members to accelerate solutions to achieve a more sustainable built environment. Through these GBCs, 123,000 people participated in events or participate in events annually. GBCs communications have an estimated reach of over 500 million people across the globe. 2.9 billion square meters of buildings have been certified sustainable by 36 GBC rating tools, and about 50,000 people were trained or are trained by GBCs annually. So our network is organized across 5 regions and around the world. So we have Africa, the Americas, Asia Pacific, Europe, and the Middle East and North Africa. Within my capacity, I manage both the Africa and Middle East and North Africa networks, which include about 17 green building councils. Green buildings provide some of the most effective means to achieving a range of global goals, such as addressing climate change, creating sustainable and thriving communities, and driving economic growth. As you could see from the SDG slide in front of you, we've got SDGs 3, 7, 8, 9, 11, 12, 13, 15, 17, which means that our work really impacts a lot of these SDGs, and this is a great opportunity that we could build on and capitalize on. Now, our WorldGBC strategy, and based on the SDGs you saw, is focused on 3 key areas: climate action, resource efficiency, and health and well-being in order to drive impact from the building and construction sector to meet the UN Sustainable Development Goals we just mentioned. Our global and regional projects facilitate the development of solutions towards our common mission. Supporting us are a number of companies. So along with the commitment of our GBCs, our work is enhanced by support and guidance of our corporate advisory board. That includes companies such as AkzoNobel, Carrier, City Development Limited, Google, JLL, JP Morgan, Majid Al Futtaim from the Middle East, Multiplex, Saint-Gobain, Show Contracts, Signify, Siemens, United Technologies, and Volvo. These all sit on our corporate advisory board and help us shape our strategy towards the future. We have also other companies supporting our global projects that I'll be talking about, plus sponsors that are, or partners who are supporting our regional networks. Now, challenges present a strong leadership opportunity for the building and construction industry. Green buildings are a critical solution to tackling climate change, as we mentioned, and they also offer a host of additional economic and social benefits. As more solutions become available and the consequences of inaction are increasing, the value proposition is improving. So green buildings help in improving efficiency or building efficiency, which represents one of the most affordable and effective ways to cut carbon emissions. Green, sustainable buildings have reduced energy costs, water costs, waste, and other associated impacts. They improve internal comfort conditions and therefore staff productivity. It has been proven that people who work in green offices produce better than those who do not. The number of building owners reporting expected increase in asset value of green buildings of more than 10% has risen from 16% to 30% since 2012. Investors demonstrating responsible investment are seeking portfolio risk mitigation strategies and accelerated energy efficiency and shift away from fossil fuels will achieve net zero emissions in the sector before 2050. Now, in order to achieve our mission, we have developed a few global projects. Following COP21, we established the Advancing Net Zero project to drive decarbonization of the world's buildings. This requires coordinated action of business, government, and NGOs. Our GBCs are responding to this challenge, developing mechanisms and initiatives to facilitate mass market transformation. So through this program, we are calling for all new buildings to operate at net zero carbon from 2030 and 100% of buildings to operate at net zero carbon by 2050. To achieve this, we have identified 4 action pathways to achieve these goals. Certification, corporate engagement, training and education, and government engagement. To ensure alignment, we have created an umbrella definition for net zero carbon buildings that can be adapted as necessary in different markets. And 4 key principles to ensure alignment are measuring and disclosing carbon, so operational performance of buildings based on metered data, reduce energy demand, so prioritize energy efficiency, as you can see at the right side of the rate balance from renewables using offsets as a last resort, and improving verification and rigor, so progressing to include other impact areas such as embodied carbon, water and waste, and I'll be talking a little bit about embodied carbon. So these 4 steps are very important in decarbonizing the built environment. What we cannot measure, we cannot reduce. We start the reduction with energy efficiency, then we generate the balance from renewables and improve verification and rigor along the way. So buildings, as we said in the beginning, are responsible for 39% of end-use energy-related carbon emissions globally. Operational emissions account for 28% of the overall emissions, and are critical and are a critical priority that has been well understood at the individual building level, with a wide variety of certification schemes available globally. So what about the remaining 11% of emissions? These come from embodied emissions, but how important are they? What we build from today will be here in 2050. And as we work to reduce operational emissions, embodied emissions becomes proportionately more significant. So we stand at a critical time to minimize the impact from embodied emissions. The World Green Building Council, in collaboration with its member GBCs, partners, and over 200 stakeholders, has released a call to action report to tackle embodied carbon. The report is the first of its kind and calls for radical collaboration across the entire value chain to achieve full decarbonization of the building and construction sector, setting ambitious yet achievable milestones and targets for action. Our vision combines operational and embodied carbon, so the 28% and the 11% carbon emissions, and calls for a 40% reduction in embodied carbon by 2030 in all new buildings and infrastructure projects, with significant upfront carbon reduction, in addition to all new buildings operating at net zero carbon. And by 2050, new buildings, infrastructure, and renovations will have net zero embodied carbon, and all buildings, including existing buildings, must be net zero operational carbon. Another project is our Better Places for People, which is a global project that links buildings to the people that occupy them. It's very interesting here to realize that 90% of our time is spent inside buildings, and 92% of the air in places we live in is unsafe to breathe. And this was pre-COVID-19. And I think everybody saw the link between pollution and the level of infection and resilience. So to bring these study findings to life, one of the key outputs of the World Green Building Council is case study reports. We demonstrate that these trends of health and well-being co-benefits in green buildings are actually taking shape around the world. In the past 5 years, we've published reports around a variety of building typologies, including retail, homes, schools, and offices. The first Better Places for People report, health, well-being, and productivity in offices, is often credited as being the takeoff publication for health and well-being in the built environment industry. The report goes into great detail about the role of how 90% of our time is spent indoors and 90% of company overheads is spent on staff. So doesn't it make sense for green buildings to capitalize on this trend and show the co-benefits of sustainable buildings? Since 2014, we have published 4 more reports. You can see the images on the slide with our most groundbreaking report to date, published in April 2018. The WorldGBC launched a campaign on this in April 2019 with our partners, the Climate and Clean Air Coalition. The Climate and Clean Air Coalition is a voluntary partnership of governments, intergovernmental organizations, businesses, scientific institutions, and civil society organizations committed to protecting the climate and improving air quality through actions to reduce short-lived climate pollutants. Our global network currently includes over 100 state and non-state partners and hundreds of local actors carrying out activities across economic sectors, kicked off by 5 global governments, and unit took place in 2012. Our latest campaign is Planta Sensor. The purpose is to prove that green buildings are part of the solution for improving human and planetary health. To learn more about this global campaign, please visit our website and check more details there. So the idea here is to come up with a global air quality monitoring campaign aimed at collecting accessible information about the places we live in. And what we did is we distributed sensors to a big number of our GBCs around the world. One is for outdoor, one is indoor, and this way we could access different air quality conditions across the world. Now, throughout the world WorldGBC is leading on a number of regional projects. We spoke about the global projects, but we have some regional projects to drive transformational change against specific topics in particular markets. From cities climate action in Latin America to sustainable reconstruction in the Middle East, deep renovation strategies and green finance in Europe, to deep dive into achieving net zero in Asia. Now, for the Middle East, the region I'm responsible for, we found that green and affordable reconstruction and regeneration guidelines for urban areas is extremely important, especially for areas that have suffered damage and destruction due to conflict, water stress, and environmental degradation. And we've established a partnership around this with UN Habitat and Chatham House, and we've launched the first phase of this project recently, whereby we will be starting work on this regional project soon, hoping that decision makers, financial institutions, cities, etc., could use these guidelines when reconstructing their countries. So that was it from my side. These are our contact details. Please feel free to ask any questions now, or maybe email them to me later. So without further ado, I'll start looking into the questions. So the first question I see in the chat box is from Mar Abalo. Are you planning to try to involve, and if yes, how, the GAFA companies into this project? As I understand, they will be big players in building our cities. What do you mean by GAFA, Mar Abalo, please? You can unmute yourself.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether Mar can turn her mic on or not.
Yes.
You might need to do that manually, Mar. She may not be able to.
Okay, I cannot see her. Maybe she's left the...
She did clarify. She said the Google, Amazon, Apple, and Facebook.
Ah, okay. Thank you for the clarification. I did not see that. So are you planning to try to involve the GAFA? Of course we are. And as you saw, Google is one of our corporate advisory board members. And just before we had this session, I contributed to some of the topics within which we would like Google to be involved in the movement. Google is extremely important. We have not, however, secured support from Amazon, Apple, and Facebook, but maybe we should put them on our target list. But Google has been really supportive, and they were supposed to join our regional congress that was supposed to be held here in Dubai, or in MENA in Dubai, but unfortunately it was postponed probably till next year due to COVID-19.
Hi, Mohammad. I also have a question.
Yes, can your name, please?
Marta.
Yes, Marta, okay.
Yeah, it's me. My question has to do, so I work in wildlife conservation, so I'm always interested in the wildlife angle. So I just wanted to understand a little bit better how biodiversity and promoting urban wildlife can enter into the picture when we're talking about greening buildings, and whether that's something that's usually looked at as well besides the carbon emissions.
A great question. Now, the reason I am part of this global green movement is, as in your case, is because I was interested in biodiversity. And when I was 10 years old, I started my first bird watching observations. So this is how I ended up here. And I've been advocating for this a lot. And it was only till recently that we are including biodiversity in our health and well-being guidelines. So it's extremely important to bring back nature to the city instead of us having to go out to nature. And I think what we saw with the aftermath of the lockdown is that a lot of biodiversity and wildlife has come back to the city. The other day I was on a similar event with WorldGBC, and I was doing the webinar from the garden, and as a bird watcher, I realized that a lot of types of birds that we did not usually see, as such in Amman, for example, such as the nightingale, were just there. So this means that we could and have the opportunity of bringing back nature into the city, and this is being included in our health and well-being requirements. So a great point. And I think one of the good examples I saw of this was in a city called Freiburg in southern Germany, where they tried to ensure that biodiversity is maintained and children and people have access to that and can enjoy it to the fullest possibility.
Great, thank you. I have one hand up here from Elmira. Elmira, go ahead.
Yeah. Yes, I think also to piggyback on what Marta just said. Where does I'm not like the biggest advocate of the one-sided fixed tech solutions when it comes to green recovery. So my question is, education being at the core, where do you see, or is there any plans or programs? I know UNESCO has a whole sustainability agenda regarding that, but where does farm-based education become something that's more practiced in cities, so more like urban farming, if you want, within like urban settings, so having like community gardens accessible to people living in the city, in order to build you know, a greener city, if you want, but just in terms of the quality of the air too, and invite students participate, not just as part of like after school community volunteering project, but as a core program within the education system, where they are actually being asked on initiatives and deploying solutions on how to better the urban setting, the urban farming setting, if you want. So like there's discussion right now about like growing mushrooms in coffee grounds, like so many other tests in like scientific evidence-based projects that could be actually part of communities and like, you know, cities, urban focus. Like where does that play a role? So it's not just like this tech green buildings we're talking about, but it's more of a holistic approach on how humans relate to land, to food, to agriculture, in order to create the new future for the economy and for education system, and to build new job markets, because we're going to be facing after COVID a huge unemployment rate, and food security is going to become a huge problem. So where does that really play a role, and how does that fit in within the bigger sort of green building projects?
Yes, so I think you've touched upon three main areas. One is urban agriculture, one is the green cover within the city, and the third is education. I'll start with the role that plants play in, also not just in making us feel more comfortable and relaxed, but also in reducing the heat island effect. So in a lot of our cities today, because it's not really green, you'll find that there's a difference in temperature between the city center and the suburb. And this is caused by the materials used in buildings, the energy or the temperature caused by machines, etc. So they call it the heat island. So one very important impact on reducing this heat island is planting more trees, of course. The second thing, in terms of agriculture and green roofs, of course, these are embedded into green buildings, are extremely important. In my garden, I plant many vegetables, and I think everybody can. It's just a matter of knowing how and trying to implement. A few years ago, and within another capacity, I've been active in the field of environment for a while now. We had an initiative with the US Forest Service, and I went to one of the very poor districts in Chicago and saw how a lot of these children who would have been otherwise lost to crime or other things were all trained on this type of agriculture. So they found that they connecting these children with agriculture or urban agriculture or green roofs or whatever, they were preventing them also from going into other areas and making them calmer and more aware of the green side of life. In terms of education, and also we had something called open door classrooms, where, and this is not within the WorldGBC, but within another capacity, where children were able to go out and study in the open. And I think this not only helps them connect with nature and with the environment, but also reduces the amount of energy consumed in having them hosted in classrooms. So all of the points you mentioned are extremely important. They are part of some of the rating tools or our health and well-being guidelines. And I think these are practical steps that this club could work on in order to ensure that as many people around the world recognize the need to have their own grown vegetables and connection with nature.
Okay, thank you.
You're most welcome.
Okay, I think that if there are no further questions, I don't see.
Yes, there's a question. Who's this?
Salah.
Salah. Yes.
Yeah, actually, two connected questions. I want to go back to your point on achieving, even on existing buildings, the zero carbon by 2050.
Yes.
It might seem for some people that it's quite futuristic, but I just remember that like 2000 was just a few days ago, and in a few days we will be there. So how realistic do you think really it is to be able to do that on existing buildings, especially probably in places like Dubai, where almost every building is not so old and it's very easy to fix things, but in places where you have like old downtowns or old buildings that really slums in some places, etc. So how realistic is that in your opinion? And I want to connect to the other question, the role of policy making. So I realized in a lot of areas that when you can put things into law, be it related to the environment or otherwise, implementation is accelerated and then targets are possible to be achieved. But when it remains within the area of nice to have or depending on people's goodwill, it doesn't really pick up and becomes quite difficult to implement on a large scale. So I know that the green building councils in different countries, part of their role is to try to lobby and put things into laws, but that doesn't always happen. So to what level do you think this is really achievable by 2050? And do you see governments generally, globally and in the region you're responsible for, being cooperative, aware, and willing actually to put laws to make things happen? Thank you.
Okay. Very important question. So I'll start with the net zero question, and I'll start from Dubai. Every year I'm part of a judging panel for the MENA Green Building Awards that is managed by the Emirates Green Building Council. And this year, one of the projects I evaluated was a net positive building in Dubai. Not just a net zero building, it was a net positive building, and it was one of Majid Al Futtaim's buildings. Now, believe it or not, but one of the first 3 signatories of our net zero commitment came from Dubai, and it was Majid Al Futtaim. Of course, for those who do not know, this is a company that runs some of the largest malls in Dubai. They've got a few hotels. They have businesses all over the Middle East, North Africa, and Africa as well. So they were one of the first companies that signed this commitment. And the thing is, they did not just sign it because it was something good to do. Of course, they have their CSR strategy and everything, and they try to do good things. But they also found that there was economic value in the process. So by starting with energy efficiency, you cannot achieve net zero without starting with energy efficiency. So you maximize the benefit you get from the energy you have. They found that this was saving them a lot of money, which was really helpful. Now, yes, it's not easy, but it's possible, and it differs from one climatic zone to another. I was in Kenya in December. We had a net zero event there. In Kenya, for example, the weather is beautiful all around the year. They don't really need a lot of heating or a lot of cooling. It's much easier there, and you could, in that case, use a lot of passive design. So the way you shape the building, the way the materials you use, etc., all help in achieving net zero. And there was also, we had some reporter from Reuters here in Jordan last year, and we introduced her to some people here, and we discovered that most of the mosques in Jordan were net zero because there was this scheme by the government that helped them achieve this. So the idea is, it might sound really difficult, but it's possible because now we have the expertise, we have the technology, and if it's coupled with the political will that you just mentioned and spoke about, things could become much easier. And yes, of course, it's very important to work on advocacy. One of the main roles of any GBC anywhere in the world should be advocacy. And I think due to the efforts of our GBCs, 35 laws and regulations were changed around the world. I think mainly in Europe, where they work closely with the European Commission. We are also part of something called the Global Alliance for Building and Construction, which is another tool through which we try to join the efforts of others in advocating for these rules and regulations. But as I mentioned in the beginning of this webinar, although we had so many countries sign the Paris Agreement, only about 1/3 of these countries did ensure that they had laws and regulations in place for energy efficiency, which is the first step towards net zero buildings and full decarbonization.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Okay, I don't see any hands up, and there are no more questions in the chat. So maybe I'll say thank you again to Mohammad for this presentation. And we will be making the recording available online for those who are not able to be here live today. So thank you.
Thanks a lot, Marta, and thanks a lot for the club members. It was a great opportunity to connect with you all. And if you had any additional questions in the future, you know where to find me. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mohammad. We'll share also your contacts with the club members again.
Very good. Bye-bye for now.